No, I've always collected Pokemon cards, but recently my wife and I have gotten into playing the game together as a fun hobby. Do you have any Mewtwo's?
Go fish.
Dang it. And one of the most annoying things about the trading card game are these damage tokens or damage counters. They are super tiny, they are made out of paper, and they come in a lot of deck sets. They get everywhere, and when you have a ton of damage on the boards, it can make your board pretty messy. But we recently got one of these Shining Fates boxes, and it comes with damaged dice. Well, I happen to like dice, and I happen to like making my own versions of dice. It comes with a little D6 pip, which we're going to ignore for the purposes of this video, but it also comes with 6 die that determine damage numbers. 3 of them that go from 10 to 60, 2 that go from 70 to 120, and then 1 that goes from 130 up to 180. So I thought I'd make my wife a gift set, that way she can have some that she really loves the color of because she doesn't particularly care for the EV brown. I have some Dragon Skin 20 silicone left over here, so this is really a free project to do and it'll make my wife happy. To make these slab molds for this, we're going to use 2 large cups because I got some extra sets from people who didn't want them off of eBay. Suckers, I will happily take them. These cups have this large ledge on them that will be perfect for making these molds out of. You can see these dice are way smaller than that second ring of these ledges that I'm going to use. So I'm going to cut a little hole in the side and then cut it out with scissors. You absolutely don't have to be using a cup like this. You can use really anything to make your molds out of. I just happen to want to use these because I'm going to mix in silicone on them anyway, so they're not really getting wasted. I now have 2 sets worth of mold casings, or whatever you want to call them, things that I will make the molds in, and I need some way to stick the dice down to the bottom. I'm finding lately the best way to do that is with just some Scotch shipping tape. The lid to this cup is about 4 inches in diameter, and my tape is not that wide, so we can fix this by laying out 1 strip of tape and then overlaying the other strip on the top of it. We want the sticky side up. You definitely don't want sticky side down, or else you're never going to get it off of your work table, and that's really kind of going to defeat the point of what we're using tape for anyway. Once we have a large enough layer of tape, we can go ahead and start sticking some of our dice down to it. Now, I'm going to stick the lowest side, the 10 side, down on this die, but these don't actually follow conventional die rules, so it's not 60 on the opposite of the 10's face, which really kind of annoys me. But you can see here that this sticks pretty well, and you're not going to have a lot of overlap. You don't have to use things like glue dots or anything like that. This tape will kind of get the job done. For the others, I'm going to stick the 70 side down for the second tier up, and then the 130 side down for the final tier. Then I just place the cup down onto the actual tape, and we have the makings of what will contain our mold. Now, this could very well work, and braver people than me may give it a shot. However, I am afraid of things failing on these 2 molds. So since I've made both of them, now I'm going to hot glue a bead around where the cup meets the tape. That way any silicone does not even have a chance to try and leak out of this mold and cause a failure. I hate it when things fail, and it's better to do a little bit of precaution up front. After that dries and cools down, I go ahead and cut off the excess tape so that it's a little bit easier to work with whenever I'm putting this in the pressure pot. And this is the container in which we will now start to mix and pour our Dragon Skin 20 silicone. You could really use any silicone you want for this. It doesn't even have to be a clear kind like this or sort of clear. Since it's going to be a slab mold, you don't really need to do much cutting. You don't really need to do much seeing inside of it. It's really dealer's choice. This is just what I happen to have on hand. This is also some really thick stuff when it's all mixed up and ready to go. It's like a very, very thick honey. And when you pour it in on this, you want to make sure that you pour it in nice and slow so it has a good chance to remove any air bubbles that would be stuck to the numbers, like that 30 face that's sticking up there. If you happen to get any air bubbles on that, it's much harder to remove those with the pressure pot because it has a chance of being bigger bubbles. So go slow. Now I'm going to take my silicone and put it inside the pressure pot. Whenever you're doing this, you're trying to remove bubbles from the silicone. That way, when you put it in a pressure pot later for resin, you can get nice crystal clear dice. I'm going to put it in there at 40 psi for the required cure time of the silicone. Now we have 2 half molds completed, but you can see there's a little bit of warpage here on one of them. So let's go ahead and remove the casings for this mold, the hot glue and the plastic, just by snipping it with some scissors. And you can see one of them has this weird little dip in the bottom. I think I didn't get the tape quite all that flat. I'm going to go ahead and continue with this to see what happens and see if it's really that much of a problem. But compared to the second mold, it is way warped, and I'm not really sure that this is going to turn out well. But you all can see, and that way you learn to go past the mistakes that I make. Now I'm going to use my X-Acto knife to make make a bunch of keys and registration marks by cutting out pieces of silicone. A lot of people like to make their keys or registration marks by putting little items down in with the dice that they're making. This way you can have some perfect little object or like round bead that you can recreate in silicone. I always find it better to do it with a knife personally because it makes a more unique shape. You can see how much silicone I actually had to cut away from both of these to make nice and efficient registration marks. That will be imperative for making sure our lid fits on there properly. And to be able to make a lid, we need something to contain more silicone. So we're going to create an almost dam out of Scotch tape once more, and we're also going to use some more hot glue at the bottom. Depending on what you're using to make your molds, rubber bands may be good enough to create a seal between the tape and the silicone, but because mine's tapered, the rubber bands just fall off. So we're going to use hot glue once more to make sure that we don't have any silicone leaking out the bottom. Hot glue doesn't really stick to silicone. It does just enough to get this project finished. But now we need to go ahead and lube up the top part of the mold by using some petroleum jelly. I just use Vaseline and a Q-tip and touch every single part of the mold that is going to touch silicone except for the faces of the dice. I want to make sure we don't touch those because whatever we put on them is going to be recreated in the lid. But we do want to get as close as we possibly can to each edge of the die here. You can see with the light reflecting off how much Vaseline I have right up next to it without actually going on the surface or face of each die. Now do this to both of the molds and we are good to go to pour the rest of our silicone on top. We want a nice thick lid on a cap mold like this, probably something around 3/8 or maybe even 3/4 of an inch. We want it to be heavy enough to where it can weigh down and not be lifted up by the resin that we're going to pour into these die. Yet again, slow and steady pouring wins the race here. You're on the final leg of this race and you don't want to mess it up at the very, very end. So I'm going to stick these in the pressure pot one more time and bada bing, bada boom, we have some completed molds. We can take these out of their casing. The hot glue is really easy to just peel off, and then so is the tape because nothing should really stick to this silicone. And there may be some parts that are stuck together. Silicone will actually stick to silicone. So if you missed a part with some Vaseline or whatever you're using for mold release, it may stick to itself. That's okay. You can just cut that away with a knife and it won't have any problems. You can do the same thing on anything on the inside, but you can see here, this came out pretty good looking. We can see the numbers in the top and all of the dice pop out really easily. I was very excited and thinking, you know what, maybe both of these molds will work properly. I made two just in case, so hey, maybe I just over-prepared. We finally get to do the fun part of pouring some resin, but that's messy, so I'm going to use some wax paper and make sure I have some nitrile gloves, and the resin that we're going to be using today is Envirotech's light resin. This resin is a 1-to-1 by volume resin to hardener mix, and after we mix it, I'm going to go ahead and add some blue alcohol ink to it, because these are for my wife and she really likes blue, but I can't not add gold liquid glitter in there myself. I made that glitter in a DIY video, and I'll put that link up in the top right right now if you want to go check that out. I think adding a liquid glitter to any sort of transparent color really makes that stuff come alive. When I asked my wife what type of dice she wanted for her Pokemon set, she said she really liked the mana potions that I created, and so I'm gonna go ahead and add some mica flakes or unicorn skin if you watch nail resin videos. Now that the resin is all mixed up, we can go ahead and begin pouring it into our molds. This is another case of slow and steady wins that race, so you want to make sure that you pour nice and slow into these molds. There's a lot of bubbles that can get trapped on the zeros, and these dice have a lot of zeros in them, so it's good to just take your time. I always pour extra resin on the lids or the caps of these slab molds. The more resin you have, the better. It's always good to have extra rather than less in your molds. That way it has somewhere to pull from instead of running out and leaving a large gap or void. See, right here, when I have extra resin, I just pour it right on the top. You're going to see a lot of surface bubbles, and you can get rid of most of those by taking a lighter that you borrow from your wife and just never bring back downstairs. After those bubbles are popped, you can put the lids or the slabs on top of the bottom half of the molds. Because we made awesome keys and registration marks, it should almost lock into place and sit down perfectly on the bottom half of your molds. After we do that, we're going to put these in the pressure pot again for 12 hours to let them cure, and bada bing, bada boom, we have some dice? Question mark? We do, but only in one of the mold sets. The one that was nice and flat came out really, really good. It's got a nice thin layer of resin, and we can pull all of the dice out of there easily. Honestly, even here, it has a bit of a thicker layer than I was expecting, but that was no problem. This other one that had the warpage on it, yeah, most of the resin moved off to one side and it left a lot of dice with huge voids and gaps in them. I don't know if there's any fixing that I can do to this. Luckily, I made 2 for this video. That way we had something to fall back on and I didn't have to start all the way over. But if that does happen, sometimes you just got to throw in the towel and start over. Luckily, the flashing I had on these was pretty minimal, but if you do have some, you can take an X-Acto knife and run it along the edge, but there is a thin layer that we do need to sand away. I'm just going to hand sand these. It would take more effort to get out my revolving sanding machine that is a pottery wheel, so it's sometimes fun to just break out the hand sanding anyway. I'm using Zona papers, which are basically really fine grit sandpapers, and taking it through the motions until we finally have a really crystal clear glass-like surface. Now that these are all polished up, we can move on to inking or painting the numbers. Because some people recommended it in the last video, I tried to give my wife an all blue set of dice using this metallic blue paint, but it really just kind of disappears into the numbers there and you can't see it all that well at all. But one good color combo with blue is always silver, so I'm going to use some Citadel Stormhost silver to add into the numbers here, and that paint really pops on that blue. It gives it a nice easy way to read, and you don't want to have to struggle to read your dice, especially these Pokemon ones that are just supposed to show you the damage done to your Pokemon. And honestly, it's really nice for my wife and I to have a skill that we're both very good at, like Pokemon. It's a skill that we share together. Okay, this is legendary comic artist Jakey Boy Arts reading for the part of Skillshare Transitions Guy, whenever you're ready.
Somebody says Skillshare.
That was good, but I need a bit more energy out of you. You're replacing an institution.
Okay. Did somebody say...
Okay, just a little more.
Did somebody say...
Give me more energy!
Did somebody say Skillshare?
Louder!
Did somebody say Skillshare?
Come on! Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. If you haven't heard of Skillshare before, they're an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative folk like you and I to get lost in our passions and explore some creative things. There's a bajillion different classes to learn from, but lately I've been interested in learning a lot about leatherworking. But you could learn a ton of different things like resin work or how to make awesome transitions like I do. It's designed around learning, so there's not going to be any ads, and they're always launching a ton of new classes. And with membership being less than $10 a month for a yearly membership, it's a really good deal. And look, you don't always have to jump right into everything. Small steps turn into giant leaps eventually. Just try something new and you might find something that you love. And you might even be able to use some classes for different purposes. Like there's this class that I really like called How to Make a Minimal Leather Valet Tray by Timothy Ung. I think this looks like a very awesome dice tray, and so I'm interested in taking this class so that I can make my own dice tray, even though that's not what it's intended for. So help me to help you, because the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership so that you can explore your creativity. Now, let's get back to the glamour shots of these dice. I can finally replace those stupid paper tokens and have something really neat looking for my wife to use on the table. These are very similar to Magic the Gathering countdown dice in that they're not actually intended to be rolled at all. You just flip it to whatever side you need for the damage. I think Rybo Wife will be really happy with these. If there are some other game-specific dice that you can think of that you'd like me to make my own versions of, maybe MTG Countdown, Fate Dice, I don't know, let me know in the comments down below what you'd like to see me take a crack at. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you might want to see some more dice making content. Like the video if you like it. Dislike it if you disliked it. I want to hear that too, and I hope that you all have a fantastic day.